Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video on fractions, percentages, and decimals. It turns out that these three things are just different ways to represent the same number. You probably already know, for example, that 50% is the same as a half, which is also the same as 0.5. If I had some like pizza here, and I gave you 50% of the pizza, that's the same amount you'd get if I gave you half a pizza or 0.5 pizzas. In each case, you'd get this much pizza. You know, if there were 8 slices, you'd get 4 of them. So all of these numbers are the same. If we were to draw a number line, let's say between 0 and 1, we know that this is halfway. 50%, half, and 0.5, halfway between 0 and 1. All of these three would have the same value and the same place on the number line. So what about another percentage like 32%? Well, it might not be clear what this will look like as a fraction. You can probably tell what it will look like as a decimal. Nevertheless, we need a definitive way to convert. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at converting fractions and decimals into percentages or percentages into fractions and decimals. Okay, so we're not going to look at converting between fractions and decimals, just looking at converting from percentages and to percentages. So it turns out that the conversions are very easy. If you want to go from a fraction and decimal this way to a percentage, you simply times by 100 and then add a percent sign on the end. That's what I mean by times 100%. If you want to go the other way, from a percent to a fraction or decimal, you do the opposite. You divide by 100. Just note, if you're going from a percent to a fraction, you might need to simplify the fraction. So let's look at some examples. So what we're going to do first, we're going to go through each of these 5 examples and convert them to a percent. In each case, we just times by 100. So if I have a half, and I want to convert that to a percentage, well, we already know it's 50%. So how do we get there? All we do is we take a half, we times by 100 in our calculator, and if I put that in my calculator, half times 100 is 50. It's just a half of 100. And then what I do is I stick a percent sign on the end. So a half is the same as 50%. So something similar for 3/4. I times by 100 and then stick a percent sign on the end. So 3/4 times 100 just gives me 75%. Again, you can use your calculator for this. So what about from a decimal to a percent? Well, as our little chart here says, we still times by 100. So remember, timesing by 100 is the same as moving the decimal point 2 spots to the right. So I can just move the decimal spot to here. So instead of being 0.86, it becomes 86.0. So it's just going to be 86%. So I can do the same for 1.23. I can move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, and I get the number 123, and of course I need to add a percent sign. So 1.23 is 123%. You can have percents that are more than 100%, just means it's more than one whole. So for 0.01, same thing, we're going to move the decimal point 2 spots, and we get 1%. Okay, now let's look at some examples where we're going the other way. We start with a percent and we convert it to a fraction or a decimal. Okay, so let's now look at these examples where I'm converting a percent to either a fraction or a decimal. So we'll start with these ones where I'm converting a percent to a fraction. So I haven't gone through what a percent is. What actually does it mean? Percent means per 100. It means make it out of 100 parts. So if you have 70% of something, it means there are 100 parts and you have 70 of them. So if you get like 80% in your test, it means that if we divide the test into 100 marks, you got 80 of those marks. And just the same, if you have 80% of a pizza, we're dividing that pizza into 100 little parts and you have 80 of those parts. So going from a percent to a fraction's easy. 71% just means 71 out of 100. That's what percentages mean, out of 100. 83% just means 83 over 100. It's easy as. 64% would mean 64 over 100. Now, the first two fractions can't be simplified because there's no common factors between 71 and 100, no common factors between 83 and 100. 64 and 100, however, both have a common factor of 4. So you can either use your calculator to simplify this, or you can divide the top and the bottom by 4. The reason I'm dividing top and bottom by 4, it's the highest number that goes into 64 that also goes into 100. So 64 divide 4, and then 100 divide 4. So 16 over 25 and 64% are the same number. So now let's look at converting a percent to a decimal. So of course, when we were going from a decimal to a percent, we moved the decimal point 2 spots to the right. This time we're dividing by 100, we move the decimal point 2 spots to the left. So 104 is the same as 104.0, so we're just putting the decimal point and moving it 2 spots to the left. So 104% is the same as 1.04. What about 2%? Well, if we start with decimal point here, we move it 1 spot to the left, there are no more numbers. So we put a 0 here to hold the place, and then we move it again. 2% is the same as 0.02, so please make sure you don't get confused. 0.2 is 20%, 0.02 is 2%. So for 12.5%, hey, percentages don't need to be whole numbers, so we're just going to do the same thing. Move the decimal point 2 spots to the left. But of course, once again, we sort of run out of numbers, so I can put a 0 here, and then if I move it 2 spots left, I'm left with 0.125. How easy is that? So the final question I'll do, we're going to determine which is largest, 2/5, 37.5%, or 0.41. So this could be tricky to do as it is because the numbers are written 3 different formats: fraction, percentage, and decimal. So to be able to compare them easily, I'm going to convert the fraction and the decimal to a percent. So let's start with the fraction 2/5. So if I want to convert that to a percent, I just go to my calculator, I write in 2 over 5 times 100, and I should get 40%. So 2/5 is equal to 40%. So for 0.41, if I want to convert that to a percentage once again, I move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, which is the same as multiplying by 100. So 0.41 times 100, you get 41%. So now they're easy to compare: 40%, 37.5%, and 41%. Clearly, this is the largest. 41 hundredths, 41 over 100 is more than 40 over 100. If you get 41% in a test, you clearly do better than if you get 40%. So this is the largest, this is the second largest, and this is the third largest. How easy is that? All right, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.